Don't tell me any secret.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to the panel of SETA Foundation. We are hosting a very distinguished guest today, Professor Dania Thafer. Well, she is the Executive Director of Gulf International Forum. The institute is actually based in Washington, D.C., and focusing on political, economic, social, and security issues, especially on 6 Gulf Cooperation Council countries, Iran, Iraq, and Yemen. Also, she is a professor of international politics at the School of Foreign Services Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University. He has a number of books and articles. The latest one is entitled as Creative Insecurity, Institutional Inertia and Youth Potential in the Gulf Cooperation Council or countries, right? Published by Oxford University Press and Hearst Company, and 2 edited books, The Arms Trade, Military Services and Security Market in the Gulf States, Trends and Implications, which is a bit relevant to our studies as well in SETA, and Dilemma of Security and Defense in the Gulf Region. And also, she's appearing in most international media outlets. Actually, I first know the name Dania Thafer from Twitter. I was following your scripts, your assessments on the net. So thank you for coming here, and you really honored us. And right after this panel, we will sign a memorandum for further cooperation between the Gulf International Forum and SETA Foundation. And we are looking forward a lot, and we will achieve a lot, I believe. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Murat Hojam, for having me here today. I'm representing the full institution, so I have a habit of saying us. It's a distinguished privilege to be here at SETA Foundation, a top institution here in Turkey and regionally and globally. And I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very much looking forward to our collaboration, and I know it will be mutually beneficial for both Turkey, the Gulf states, and also the U.S.
Thank you. You know, today, actually, this panel is a simultaneous event of memorandum signing. On the other hand, I know that Gulf region is somehow over there, that most scholars in Turkey are interested, but not that much know about it. Why? I don't know. But there is a great region with a great potential, and Turkish scholars and students must be aware of what's going on over there. And in the meantime, the basics, pillars, general thinking, attitude, the internal political dynamics, international security, and relevance to Gulf politics, I can count a lot hot items on Gulf region. So today, our purpose was first to host a professor to give us an idea, like 101 of a regular course, what the Gulf region is in terms of politics, economy, and etc. So I would like to give floor to you, Professor. Can you please tell us something about the general posture in the Gulf region, with a small touch to economy, politics, community, etc. And by that way, our interns and guests can know more about it, maybe as a preparation for the questions.
Okay. So I'll give you an overall general perspective about the Gulf, and there's a lot to say. I think it's good to start out with a little bit of background. So more recently, let's go back prior to the Arab Spring, things were very different in the Gulf. sure, there was an interest in the overall region, but it was much more inward focused than it was prior to the Arab Spring. When the Arab Spring happened, there were a lot of vacuums and changes to regional powers, especially in the Arab world. And this caused the Gulf states to take on a greater role in the region. And this really has upgraded their status as a regional and a global player, affecting many important arenas, politically speaking, economically speaking, um, and even socially speaking. And so you've really seen a major transformation in the Gulf states' posture and in the overall region, and and I think it's really even affected the studies of the Gulf region. There's been a large proliferation of scholarship on the region, and a large interest, and it's a new area of topic. When I originally started Gulf studies in the US quite a while ago, most of the professors were not interested. They said, "Why are you wasting your time with these six monarchies? You know, they have the same politics. Focus on the Levant, focus on Syria, focus on Egypt, even Turkey, which is still a very important player in the region, and all of them are important. But to show that there's not even a thing such as Gulf studies. We're talking 10 to 15 years ago, um, and and um, and so this is a growing field. It's very important, and the Gulf states have also been very active in knowledge production about the region. And we're talking about six countries, so their interests and policies are different among each one of them. They each have their own character, which should go without saying. But believe it or not, I have to always underscore this point in many different forums. Um, Saudi Arabia is obviously the biggest Gulf country with the largest population of 22 million, hosts Mecca and Medina, gives it a certain political, social, religious prominence, and has transformed rapidly over the last few years. I mean, if you go to visit Riyadh now, you would not recognize Riyadh. It's changed socially, economically. There's projects. Women have been much more involved now in the political scene and the economic scene. Even there's a lot of social liberalization that has happened there. And even economically speaking, things have changed quite rapidly. There's taxation in Saudi Arabia, which was something probably unheard of in the past. It's becoming more, I think, capitalistic in nature, and less dependent on government jobs. And it blew me away to go there, to see Saudi Arabia before COVID and after COVID. It's completely different. So this just reflects the pace of transformation going on in the Gulf states. And then you have, another Gulf state, which is United Arab Emirates, and it's a federation. It's very different in that regard. It's a very economic savvy country. It's very well known for that. Very pragmatic when it comes to political engagement. Um, and both Saudi Arabia and the UAE are really moving forward in innovation-led development. Something characteristic of the Gulf states collectively is that they have a very large youth population. And this is something I talk about in my recent book. Um, and so they're trying to all develop in regards to that. And innovation-led development is one key approach to addressing that. In reference to the other Gulf states, you have Qatar, who is a small country but plays a very prominent international role. and mediation. And in fact, very interestingly, in their constitution, mediation and resolving conflicts is part of their constitution. And that's how important it is to their international and global presence. And, we have the Gaza war ongoing right now, and they're very involved in the mediation of that, which is a difficult task. And then you have Kuwait, which is originally my background. And Kuwait is a smaller country sandwiched between Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. And it's very careful and calculated in how it balances its politics. And is it lagging a bit on the reform question? But it was the most democratic Gulf state until recently. The parliament got disbanded for up to 4 years. And so that is a question about how now it will reform and how it will develop. And then you have Oman. Oman is very special, has very good relations with Iran, has a long history of Iran. And even before the recent Sultan Qaboos, the late Sultan Qaboos, passed away, one of his last visitors was Iranian leadership. And it's very unique when compared to the other Gulf states in terms of its policies. It tries, to deal with its neighbors and look at things from a very pragmatic and really tries to avoid any sort of conflict and confrontation as long as it doesn't test its core interests. So it has its own characteristic. It's been reforming heavily under the new Sultan. He's really been trying to move forward in developing its economy. And recently they've rolled out actually taxation that's also interesting. And then we have Bahrain, which is a smaller state, and is very close to Saudi Arabia, and it's kind of very much nowadays more influenced by the UAE. And they're actually the first country to really undergo a transition from high dependence on oil. And so Bahrain is a very interesting case in that regard. And from the U.S. perspective, they stand out because of the Abraham Accords, and the UAE as well is a signer of the Abraham Accords. And I just wanted to get you a little bit of flavor about them. There's so much more to say. These are 6 countries, so please feel free.
Okay. Then my second question comes maybe in relevance with the general depiction of the countries in the region. Well, the priorities and policies are important per these individual countries. For instance, for some, it's the state security. For another, it may be regime security in terms of politics. For some, it's the rentierism that drives the country, and it may cause a democracy deficit. For some others, it's about balancing the societal, features like Bahrain, Shiaism, Sunnism, etc. So, in terms of individual Gulf countries, you can pick some, I mean, not all of them. What are the priorities and what are the policies as a response or as a prerequisite of these priorities in the region? While I'm teaching, for instance, my course regarding the Middle East, I take military affairs, democracy, nationalism, political Islam, rentierism or political economy as the base for discussions in every week. I have 14, headlines for every week. And I have noticed that for some countries, it's the political Islam that makes the country running much more motivated. For some others, it's the rentierism. So how can you assess it?
Well, I think you bring up very important themes to look at and ideological perspectives. And that's a great question. Well, when it comes to the Gulf states with the new generation, they're trying to veer away from ideological stances, if you will. But I mean, there's no such thing as not having an ideology. A lack of ideology is an ideology in itself. But 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 right now the push is for nationalism. So there's a high sense of nationalism that's been pervading the Gulf states. Before let's say the Gulf crisis that started in 2017, and all of these events, there was this sense of Khalijiness, which is a Gulf-wide identity that was emphasized on. And it was culturally emphasized on, it was politically emphasized on through poetry, through different ways. And after the Arab Spring and the Gulf crisis and all of these events, and even COVID, that was an economic shock for the Gulf states, there has been a move for hyper nationalism. And the reason for that is they're trying to economically develop. They want the people to focus on the country itself. There's a less emphasis on being Khaliji or being part of any sort of political Islamic movement, um, or any of these other ideologies. The focus is on your national identity, serving serving your nation through being creative and developing. And this was something that everyone has underscored about the new generation, which now they're emerging and they're all playing very important roles. And interestingly enough, you also see the leadership. There's a very young leadership in the Gulf states. Sheikh Tamim, for example, he's a very young. Mohammed bin Salman is a young leader, and so they're all from the new generation. They have a different view when it comes to this particular issue. And even there's pushes for conscription in the military. Some of the Gulf states have raised the salaries of the military very high. It's one of the highest paid position and this is to promote nationalism. In the UAE, there's a required conscription for all Emirati males, and I think to a certain degree Emirati females, if I'm not mistaken. And even if you look at the children, when you celebrate national days, children have military uniforms, certain songs being played over and over. So there has been a push. There's a strong push even about dress and identity. If you go to the Gulf states, many of the people wear traditional clothes, even though they're free to wear other clothes. But it's a statement of their identity, their status. And even in some Gulf states, it could be illegal to change the thobe. So they're very, very much focused on developing this identity, and this is the main priority over all ideological leniences and over regional concerns. It's highly focused on domestic issues and domestic concerns.
These are the dimensions like nationalism, hypernationalism, regionalism. For instance, there's a famous concept, regional security systems. Sorry, regional security systems, and most students dealing with the Middle East, they usually focus on this concept. That's a fact. On the other hand, I usually question if the Arab identity, Arab nationalism, and the Gulf identity, if they match with each other or not. And sometimes it becomes like, a nation state stream in the region. Because this is my observation. You may agree or disagree. Please raise your objection. But nation states are much more effective right now, especially in the Middle East. So, per this discussion, if you take the identity issue, for instance, do you believe that there is a sense of identity that covers the overall Middle East within the parameter of Arabism or Islamism or Gulfism? So which one is much more prominent, in the Gulf region? Because, if you go and visit the 60s, for instance, Saddam Hussein, Nasser, they were addressing the overall Arabs, not only the region surrounding them. So do you believe that there is a sense of Arabism right now in the minds of politicians or Gulf communities?
Actually, no, I don't believe that. I think that my father's generation was, generally speaking, were very much focused on pan-Arabism. And nationalism had a different meaning then at that time. Today, no. There's definitely a lack of unity in the Arab world. I think it's due to many factors, but the Arab Spring has affected this perspective, and I think that this new generation has been groomed to really focus on a state-centric interest in achieving the national visions of the Gulf states. And there was really a hope that to kind of say, they were very proud to say that this generation is not tainted by ideologies. Although, I mean, there are different views in the region. You have, leftists and other people that have views, and I think this post-colonial perspective is very popular in the Gulf states, and their views on the West and colonialism and how it affected the region. I think there's a high focus on that more than intra-regional issues among the new generation. Now that could change because of what's happening in Gaza.
Okay.
I think this woke the new generation, and it was a shock for them, because my father's generation were alive in 1948, most of them, and so they had shocks and witnessed different things. And it'll be interesting how this event is going to manifest itself and how the youth will respond to that.
Okay. I totally agree. I totally agree. On the other hand, there's one more dimension in Gulf politics. It's the third parties engagement, especially per individual states. I think that the United States has long been in the area by means of military and economic, and sometimes, well, I will not tell it. They are in the region. China, well, they are energy dependent. We know it. Japanese, they are energy dependent and has always eyes on the Gulf region. And right after the eruption of the Gaza crisis last year, well, Yemenis started another wave threatening, maritime traffic. And think that third-party intervention has become one of the most practiced issue in the region, despite the fact that the Gulf countries are strong enough in terms of finance to repel any incursion, but they are compliant with some interventions. On the other hand, if you go through the last decade, let me say, for instance, UAE was in Africa, in Libya, and they started intervening in the other countries. So they became a part of third-party intervention, directly, not targeting, but intervening the politics of the other states. So in terms of third parties' engagement to the Gulf countries or all of the Gulf countries, how do you see the situation? I mean, do you believe that Gulf countries can start manufacturing their own policies, disregarding the demands of the big powers, for instance?
Well, this is a very good question, and I think it would be good to take a step back and question what's going on in the global order and the global system. There has been a change. We can't say that it's completely changed, but I think every time there's an adjustment and a change, and there's a little bit of a power vacuum or a new conflict that emerges, that is in fact, I think, a sign of a change of the global order. For example, Russia going into Ukraine. Well, that really changed the position of the Gulf states in the international system, because there was a disruption in energy from Russia, and this increased the leverage of the Gulf states. And therefore, the Gulf states have been taking on more international engagements, hedging politically with different players, both within the region and also globally, for example, with China and the Asian countries. And every time there's a shift, you'll see there's an increase in engagement. And so there is this kind of embracement of multipolarity with the Gulf states. And there is a question about how the US is going to continue to engage the region. I think when the Gulf states witnessed the US's very quick withdrawal from Afghanistan, alarm bells rang in the Gulf. They got very nervous, to see how it happened, and they realized that, okay, we need to engage with more parties. Maybe we should consider some regional security arrangements. And I think that has a lot to do with the normalization of relations with Turkey, even with Israel and Iran, which are three critical powers in the region. And from a great power perspective, also China's engagement has increased tremendously over the course of the past couple of years. And although it could be symbolic, but when the horrible events of the Gaza war happened, starting with October 7th, the first visit for the Gulf states were to Beijing. Although that probably doesn't change so much in the reality on the ground, I think it sends a very strong symbolic message. Then you have the Iran-Saudi deal, which was facilitated by the Chinese, and it was really gifted from the Saudi Arabians to the Chinese, in my opinion, because this negotiation was happening with the Iraqis and the Omanis before that, and I think that's another message to the United States. And more recently, the Chinese have been facilitating talks, and successfully, I assume, mediated with, even though there's some issues with it, with the Palestinians. So this is really changing in how China's engaging with the region. And they have a military base in Djibouti. They also have other ports and different sort of infrastructure projects across the Horn of Africa and other places that are legally could become military bases at some point. So there's some room for that, but they have not as of yet. And so there are changes, and the Chinese are very keen on taking advantage of the legitimacy that was lost from the Gaza war by the U.S. The Chinese have jumped in to take advantage of that, and so have the Russians taken advantage of that. And the Gulf states are quite aware of this, but I still want to underscore the Gulf states are still under the U.S. security umbrella. It's their most important international partner, and it's going to be like that for the time being, regardless of what happens regionally or globally. But they're preparing for any sort of scenario that could change that.
On the other hand, there is one more issue, especially of connectivity, because as far as third-party intervention, well, we can't use the word intervention. Maybe we should soften it, by the way. The connectivity of the Gulf region to the rest of the markets are really important. Right after having lessons learned from Yemen, now there's a new, trade route proposed by Iraqis. Actually, it was designed first by Italians. Its development road project, and Bilgehan has drafted a report on it and just published. So I just wonder if Gulf countries are interested in an alternative route, mainly connecting Gulf region to Europe, because EU has always remained short of intervening, but be a subject of the US government. So what do you think about it? Taking the connectivity projects proposed either by Iraq or India, China at the up north, and also EU's policies towards the Gulf region. So how do you see it? I mean, do you think that Gulf regions are interested in building a land corridor towards Europe and route Anatolia?
I think that the Gulf countries are open to engage all parties at this point. They're involved in the Belt Road Initiative with the Chinese. And some of the Gulf states were keenly interested with IMEC, which is the corridor that goes through Europe, India, through Israel to the Gulf states. And this has been very much compromised by the Gaza war. And then you have the Development Road Project, which it's with Turkey, Iraq, and interestingly, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. And the fact that UAE is involved in all three of them shows that there is a willingness. And as I mentioned, the UAE is a very pragmatic country. So they're willing to go along with all players, especially when it comes to economics.
Okay. Then let's discuss the opportunities and risks. Why? There are projects, as you have mentioned. Opportunities are very clear. Gulf countries are really rich, with exceptions. So they offer opportunities for the other countries, first of all, for their own communities. On the other hand, risks are really sometimes hard to manage, very hard to manage. And I would like to repeat one narrative, the regime security versus state security. When you visit the regime security, the stake of risk is at the highest level. But sometimes if you visit rentierism, well, it offers a lot of opportunities, especially for the peoples of the region. On the other hand, countries like Turkey, well, they are trying to find ways to resonate more with the Gulf countries, maybe for economic benefit or maybe to have a consensus on some regional matters. So how do you see it? I mean, not only about economy, but covering the overall region. What are the opportunities and risks? For instance, let me just add one more dimension for this. Sorry for adding it, but if you keep Gaza issue in mind, well, Arab League, it was unsuccessful in taking a decision. Syria crisis, well, Assad was expelled, but today they are embracing him. So the opportunities and risks, I believe, are really relevant to such sort of collectivities moves. I mean, because they have to decide with a majority or by a consensus to inhale or exhale something. So what are the basic parameters that they define opportunity or risk? This is also important, I believe.
Yes, so opportunities and risks, a very big question. And I find it a very, very interesting one in the current regional context. I think, there was a quick movement to focus on economic development. And in my opinion, not enough consideration about the regional risks, because they're all interrelated. And so developing these policies and moving forward without considering the grievances of the majority of the people in the Middle East, I think can be a very risky approach. And you talked about regime security versus state security. And yes, I think those can overlap a lot. Um, and what I really think is something to consider is state security over regional security. And there has been, in my opinion, a high focus on state security that in a way that I think compromises regional security. And I think it's really important to balance between the both, because they're both interrelated. If regional security goes out of control and Iran and Israel go to war, I mean that for example is going to affect state security. I really do think that across the Middle East, I think that the governments have not been focusing on that enough, and now I think we're starting to see consequences of that. Um, uh, uh, and The opportunities are, if there's a lot of opportunities of more engagement in the region, and perhaps sometimes when you have so much challenges and it hits rock bottom, there's so much opportunity to improve and learn lessons and reposition yourself, the region's situation. I know this is a very general point, but I think it's a really important one for policymakers in the region to think about it. In reference to economic opportunities, which are extremely important, and they're interrelated to regime security and state security. They go hand in hand. But without general security, it's really hard to have economic security. And the Gulf states are very much trying to make sure that their states are secure in this environment. It's becoming very difficult with Iran and Israel's heightened tensions. And let's see what are the ramifications of the assassination today of Hanaya. And also, I think that the issue with the Houthis and maritime security is a huge economic concern for the interests of the Gulf states, and so they're seeing their core interest becoming challenged. And I think they're realizing that, okay, we have to take some sort of role in leadership on regional issues. And we'll see. There has been talk about, well, we'll have to see what will happen with the mediation after the assassination today, because he was very important for mediation. But also what will happen, I think, in terms of having a Palestinian state. The U.S. said they're very interested. Saudi Arabia has underscored that point. And I think if this major escalation and tragedy is resolved, I think it could very much bring a lot of opportunities for the region and the people of the region, and allow the states to focus more on economic issues and have more security, and not worry about missiles flying over over their countries, which is a major concern.
Yeah, you're right. And we have witnessed it when Iran and Israel exchanged fires on each other. So there was a division in the region. And one very last question, maybe not more than 2 or 3 minutes, because we will sign a memorandum. The Gaza issue has been a very hot topic for the last 6 to 7 months, since October 7th, maybe more. And the Gulf region, or Muslim countries or Arab countries, are really and extremely divided in treating this issue. And if you just see exactly to what point we are in, well, this division caused a lot, especially loss of more than 40,000 maybe civilians. So if such issues that is a fact of the region is a concern, well, what sort of Gulf region we will witness maybe in future to treat the essential matters of the Levant and the Gulf and the wider Middle East, Eastern and North African region? Why? A divided Arab League on Syria, a divided Muslim countries on Gaza, and now we are at the brink of a war. And so, what's the point? I mean, the Gulf countries are trying to do what, and what sort of engagement they are aiming at? I mean, that's important, I believe.
Yes, even the Gulf states themselves are divided. I think they collectively they're against obviously the war and they want the violence to stop. I think the Secretary General of the GCC was very clear about that, and so have the foreign ministers been about the issue. But they have different stances when it comes to Israel relations, and that's where you find the differences between them. You can see that Kuwait is staunchly against normalizing with Israel unless they see something substantial when it comes to a Palestinian state. Qatar has taken that stance as well, although it does engage in mediation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And then Oman has been very interested. So they have engaged the Israelis before this, but Oman has been very outspoken about the Gaza war, and even there's religious leadership in Oman that have been speaking about it, which is something that is quite interesting. Now, UAE and Bahrain have already normalized relations with Israel. They've continued those relations, but they're very unhappy with the situation at hand. And Bahrain has even called upon a meeting of leaders to have a dialogue and resolve this issue. So they have been trying to, but I think there's a strong understanding that the U.S. is the main party that has leverage in this situation, and so I think many players in the region understand that. The Saudis, what I see is I think the Gulf states, they want to have regional integration. They want to bring Israel in the fold, to be honest with you. But I think what they're saying is, well, you have to be a part of the region as well. You have to play, a role that benefits the people of the region as well, if you want to be part of this region. And I think that's the point that they're going to underscore. The country that has the most leverage currently out of the Gulf states for any outcome is Saudi Arabia, because they find Saudi Arabia as the most important player in their regional integration. If Saudi Arabia were to normalize with them, I think this would help a lot of other countries and nations to normalize with Israel. But I mean, the behavior of Israel and the right-wing government, they've made it impossible for anyone to engage them. I mean, I think even in Washington, although they do support Israel, and in the national security strategy, it says that their support for Israel is ironclad. So hands down, they support Israel. But behind the scenes, people are very frustrated and very uncomfortable with this Israeli government specifically. And you see that people in Congress have been distancing themselves from Netanyahu. And I think that the Gulf states want to play a role. Saudi has the most leverage. Bahrain has called on a dialogue, but they don't see anything without the U.S. compromising in this situation.
Okay, thank you so much, Dania. It was a joy listening to you. I believe that there are a lot of questions, but I know that we have a limited time because of your appointment with the Dr. Nebi Hocam. So I will conclude it in here. I thank you a lot. And there will be an announcement by me right now. We are signing a memorandum with the Gulf International Forum to further our cooperation in the coming years. And we will institutionalize this relation, I hope. So I would like to invite Professor Nebi Hocam, and also Dania to the table to sign the signature, to sign the memorandum. Thank you.